I love when I'm invited to speak on a mission Sunday. The last time I was invited to speak at a mission event was over at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary in Boston. For Mission Week, they invited me and another guy who ran a business as mission organisation to come and speak. And it's fantastic because often this is another one of those words that feels like it's a sacred word. How does it even connect with work? Sometimes it feels like those things shouldn't go together. So you should really praise your mission committee because it's really awesome to see that these things can go together. This morning I want to talk about what does it mean to be on mission with God in our work, in our workplaces, in whatever work we do, paid or unpaid. And I want to start with what might be some controversial statements, some false stories about work and mission. So here are some things I've heard. Here are some things I actually thought for quite a while. Here are some things that maybe you've thought about as well. The first one is that my secular work doesn't matter to God. I wonder if you've ever thought that. I'll tell you a bit later about a friend of mine called Angela, and this is how she felt. Every Sunday she would go to church and she would feel uncomfortable in the pew because she would feel like her work didn't matter to God, and she felt guilty that she hadn't given up her normal job to go and to Bible college and to be a proper Christian, as she felt. Is that how you felt, that your secular work doesn't matter to God? I wonder if you've heard that your responsibility, if you do have a paid job, is to earn as much as you can so you can give as much as you can for Christian mission. Maybe this is the way that you've seen your job and the purpose of your job. But I do want to say that there's some sensitivities around that. Twice I've been part of a Christian organisation where we've been approached with someone who wanted to give us money. And when we asked a couple of more questions, we discovered that it was almost a guilt offering from someone who had earned money in ways that they didn't feel completely comfortable about. So does the means justify the ends? Is it God just interested in the amount of dollars? Or actually is there something more important, both to our work and to our giving? The third one, there's sort of a belief that there's a hierarchy of Christian occupations. Right at the top, missionaries and pastors. You're safe, Matt. And then you go down through the different layers. Youth workers, youth pastors are usually down a bit. They're always a bit suspect. And then if you work for a Christian organisation, you're up there too. And then we move down. Doctors and health professionals are often sort of pretty well in the middle. And then we go down lower and lower. Journalists, politicians, usually down the bottom. Is this the way that you imagine in your mind the hierarchy of Christian professions, Christian jobs? Is that right? And finally, the fourth myth I want to just look at, or the fourth false story, that mission at work is purely about gospel proclamation. That's all that mission is about. So I'm only on mission for God in my workplace if I get the chance at the water cooler to be able to express the gospel very, very quickly to someone. Is that the only point at which I'm on mission for God? Okay, I'm going to give you an opportunity. I saw that this was a little dangerous earlier. 60 seconds is really long. Have a little chat to the people around you. Have you heard of these stories? Have you actually lived by these stories? Is this what you feel work is about? So have a little chat amongst yourselves for a couple of minutes and then I'll call us back. Thanks. Okay, hello. We might bring those. Yeah, that's right. Oh, excellent. Thank you, Matt. I love that you're into those conversations. Thank you so much. That's awesome. Can I just say my favourite group to actually speak to is teachers? Because if I break them up to chat, the moment I start talking, they're all eyes front. It's just fantastic. Because they know that's what they expect of their students. Okay, thank you very much. Hopefully that's generated some ideas and some thoughts. What I'm going to do is very briefly give you an overview of what the Bible says about God and work. Very brief, I promise, even though we're going to go Genesis, Revelation. But anyway, we will do it. So I want to say that at the beginning, work was a good thing. Work is still, I think, a good thing. We see what happens is that God is at work. Right in the beginning of Genesis 1, God is working for creation. We often don't think of it as work because we think of work as something that takes effort. And it seems like the way that God is working is effortless, isn't it? He speaks things into being. It's a beautiful picture of him creating the universe, the cosmos, everything, and creating us as well. One of the beautiful things that you realize that God does is that he enables us to work as well. Just going to read from Genesis 1:26 to 28. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our likeness, in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created humankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." So what is God's first command to human beings? Basically, to work. To steward his good creation. And that's what our work is, isn't it? We're working with the material of creation often, to make things, to do things, to serve other people. That's what our work is. It's fulfilling that original cultural command or creation command, to do that good work. But wait, there's more. In Genesis 2, which is sort of a retelling of the creation story, in Genesis 2:5, God says he's created the garden. He says, but there was no one to work the garden. And so in verse 15, it says that God created the human being. God took the human being, put him in the garden to work it and take care of the garden. And what we don't see in the English, but is there in the Hebrew and was in many ways the inspiration for the title of my book, is that the Hebrew word that's at the basis there to work the earth is the Hebrew word avad. And avad is used later in the Pentateuch to talk about what the priests are doing in the temple, the work they do in the temple. It's to serve God or to worship God. Avad, the same word. And to keep the garden in Hebrews 2:15 is Shema. And then later in the temple, the priests are meant to keep the commandments or to put boundaries around the law. Shema. These same words. This link between work and worship was there right at the beginning. Linguistically, it's there. We sometimes miss it. But it's meant to be together. Work and worship were always meant to be together. Work was meant to be part of the way that we worship God, an expression of our worship of God. So God works, we work, but even more beautifully, God invites us to work with him. We're meant to work together with him. There's this beautiful image in Genesis 2, just a little bit later, where God brings the human being to name the animals. We sometimes sort of skip over that because we know that there's not going to be any animal that's an appropriate companion, and so God creates the woman to be the companion with God. But let's not skip over that. And what we have here is God bringing the animals before the human being and seeing what the human being is going to name the animals. And I can just imagine the laughter that was happening. You know, I mean, who comes up with the word elephant or platypus? These ideas about what the human being names the animals. I just think of this beautiful image of God saying, okay, what about this one? Naming is something that's very significant in the Bible. It's something God takes very seriously. Later in the Bible, we'll notice that God renames people for important reasons. So Abraham becomes Abraham, the father of nations. Jacob becomes Israel, one who struggles with God. Naming is really significant in the Bible. So God gives us the opportunity, gives the human being the opportunity of naming the animals. It's a really beautiful idea. that God actually wants to work with us. That part of this stewarding of creation, part of this filling of creation was meant to be something we do with God. That's not the way we think about our work, often, working with God. That's the way it was meant to be. But the reality is that that's not the way it is for very long. But I just want you to pause and think, what is the good of your work? What is good about the work you do, paid or unpaid? What is good about your work? Is it the relationships you form? Is it the way that you get the chance to do good work? Is it the way that you get to participate with God in bringing about some healing, teaching kids, fixing things? What is the good of your work? Unfortunately, I think where many of our ideas of work, and probably your average Australian thinks about work, is that working is bad. I think most Australians think of work as a 4-letter word. It is a 4-letter word, but that other 4-letter word. Most people think that life is all about working for as hard as you can, for as short as you can, so then you can really start living. Work is bad. There is an impact. Very quickly, we see that evil enters the garden. By Genesis 3, evil has entered the garden. We often use the phrase that work is cursed because there are consequences for evil, and God does speak a consequence for the evil that has happened, and he speaks it to Adam. But if you read carefully in Genesis 3, you'll notice that it's not work itself that is cursed. It is the ground that is cursed. Work is still a good thing, but because the ground is cursed, the process of work is much harder. The process of work is impacted. And that's what we experience in our workplaces often, isn't it? We would love to be really productive in our work, but sometimes it's hard to be as productive as we'd like to be. That's not the way that it was meant to be, but it is the way that we experience work. And there are thorns and thistles. As Genesis 3 tells us, there will be thorns and thistles that come up that choke our work. I prefer the term information technology. Apologies to the IT people out there. But yeah, there is struggles in work. We're all set, we're going to do this good work, and then, dang, the computer crashes, or it needs to do an update, and we're frustrated, or the person we're supposed to meet is not available, or there's things that happen all the time that impact on our ability to do good work. And so our work often feels like painful toil. It's just a struggle. That is often our experience of work, and maybe that's your general experience of work. In what ways is your work impacted by sin, by evil? It may be the sin that's within us. It may be the sin within someone else, the arguments that we have with other people. It may be the sin that's there in systems and structures that just don't work as they should. And we get so frustrated with that. I wonder how your work is impacted by that. Thankfully, that's not the end of the story. Pastor Bob Thune is an American pastor. He wrote these words in an article that was in the Gospel Coalition. It says, "It's important that we see both the goodness of work in God's original creation and the struggle of work under the fall. If we only see the good, we'll be frustrated when things don't go as they should. If we only see the bad, we'll have a hard time doing our work to the glory of God. Work is not all good, and it's not all bad. It's part of God's good creation, which has been tainted by the fall. And God is at work to redeem work." So I want to say to you that work can be redeemed. This is the way work could be. And that's what I hope you'll spend some time thinking about right now, is have some imagination, God's imagination, for what could be possible through the work that you do, paid or unpaid. You see, Jesus came to reconcile all things to himself. I'm just going to read you a wonderful passage in Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 to 20. Maybe you're familiar with this passage. "The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, Jesus, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. What's the phrase that's repeated so many times in that little passage? All things, all things, all things in heaven, all things on earth. I think we often shrink the gospel down to, or think of redemption as a spiritual redemption for our souls so that we will be safe with God when we die. I think we see from this passage that Jesus came to reconcile everything. Everything that was broken when evil entered into the world. Everything that was broken under the fall. So we have a broken connection with God, which is why it's harder to work with God. We have a broken connection with other people, which is why we have all those conflicts in our workplace. And we also have a broken connection with creation, the struggle of trying to do work as it should be done. But Jesus came to reconcile all things. And I think our work is part of the way that we can be part of that reconciliation process. Paul actually calls us to be agents of reconciliation. So how can our work be part of that? Some of you are in healing professions and you're part of the healing part of redemption, I think. Some of you are in the architectural business, and so you're building beautiful buildings that remind us of God. Some of you are in teaching, and teaching is a revelatory profession where you get to reveal who God is in some way, or his creation, his beautiful creation. Or maybe it's in the workplace, that your work in the workplace might be that little part of holding back evil and promoting what is good. How can you be part of redemption in your workplaces? You see, what we're doing is we're trying to carry on the mission of Jesus. I know that last week, I think it was, you heard from Luke chapter 4, which this image is based on, where Jesus stands up in the synagogue and he reads from the scroll of Isaiah 61. He says, "The Spirit is upon me and has anointed me." And he talks about opening the eyes of the blind. He talks about setting the oppressed free. How can we carry on the mission of Jesus in the different work that we do? His healing mission, his mission of revelation, his mission where he set oppressed people free. Some of you may be involved in social work where you see people who are oppressed and you're part of setting them free. The other week I met someone who works in prisons, and I wonder if she has a vision. I was trying to communicate to her, what's her vision? Not of setting prisons free. I don't want to say anything bad there. But just being a light in that dark, dark place. So how can you be part of Jesus' mission in the work that you do? So let's go back to these statements that we had, these false stories that I called them. What are true stories for this? The false story was that my secular work doesn't matter to God. But I want to say the true story, as hopefully I've demonstrated just a little bit, is that God does care about your work. He cares deeply about all the work you do. He commanded you to work right from the beginning. He wants to be part of the work that you do, paid or unpaid. God doesn't make a discrimination as we often do. You're only working if you're paid for it. Nah, it's anything you do with intent and purpose. That's work. Unfortunately, it means you never get to retire, sorry. But there's always good work that you can do. Earn as much as you can so you can give as much as you can for Christian mission. Well, I think actually what God calls us to do beyond that is to work ethically. That's really important. And to live missionally in the workplace. To be salt and light are the terms that Jesus uses in Matthew 5. Is there a hierarchy of Christian occupations? Well, one of the things we hold on to is the priesthood of all believers. We're all priests. I wonder if you've ever thought about the fact that you're a priest in your workplace. Isn't that an amazing thought? How does that shape the way you think about it? Your workplace may be the home. Your workplace may be in the neighbourhood somewhere in your community. Your workplace may be a workplace. You're a priest in that place. And the last one, mission at work, is about gospel proclamation. I want to say, yes, it's about that, but for some of you, it's actually illegal to proclaim the gospel in your workplaces. If you are in the health professions and in teaching, if it's not a Christian school, then actually it's illegal to proclaim. But you can respond to questions. And I think this is one of the great things we can do in our workplace. In fact, I think it's the most effective method of gospel promotion in many ways, is by being someone that other people come to and ask questions, by doing work in such a way that people want to know, what's your secret? That's what we read in 1 Peter 2, actually. We see that we are to do such good work that people might ask us the hope that we have within us. They might ask us the questions. In 1 Peter 3:15 it says, and you have to be ready to give an answer. But how much more ready are people to hear an answer to their question than merely to be told? So we have a great opportunity in our workplaces to continue Jesus' mission, to be agents of reconciliation in those places. I want to tell you just a couple of quick stories to illustrate this. I mentioned before my friend Angela. Angela, as I said, used to sit in a pew in church and just think, God isn't interested in what I do. She'd feel guilty. Well, one night, she's a friend, so she had to read my book. So she was reading my first book, and she started texting me. I think I've still got her text somewhere, and she started texting me and she said, oh my goodness, my work is important to God. She said, my simple work of being a receptionist in a hospital, God cares about my work. And I was like, yeah, that's right. I've been trying to tell her for ages, but she read it and she believed it. And then she said, oh my goodness. She said, I'm not taking God to work. God is already present in my workplace. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. He's everywhere. Of course he's in your workplace. And she went, oh. And she said, I'm a missionary in my workplace. And I said, yes, you are. It was Mission Sunday that Sunday. And so she said, I'm going to ask my minister if he can pray for me as a missionary in my workplace. And I said, absolutely. It changed her whole idea about what work was. For a long time, she'd felt like she had to take God to work, and the struggle of that, taking him to work, was a burden to her. When she started to look for where God was in her workplace, she actually found some people, some cleaners, who were really worried about a mold problem, and nothing was happening for them. So she was able to advocate on their behalf to the CEO of the hospital and get some change. Later, she changed jobs, and for the first time in her life, she prayed that God would show her the job he wanted her to do. She'd never prayed about her work before because she didn't think it was important to God. She ended up working for this magistrate, and this magistrate started to have long conversations with them over lunch. Lunch started 15 minutes for the magistrate and then got longer and longer till they were chatting for 2 hours. And this magistrate was just asking Angela's opinion about a whole range of things and about her faith. It's just, Angela's whole work life has opened up just with this simple idea that God cares about my work, and the work is somewhere where I can be on mission for God. I want to tell you about Alan. Alan was a theological lecturer. He ended up and a pastor, and he ended up having to leave his job and actually change countries for family reasons. And he was hopeful of getting another job as a theological educator after that. But unfortunately, he really struggled to find the work. He got some job doing some itinerant preaching, just going around, sort of like me, going to different places and preaching. But he got to the point where that wasn't enough to sustain his family. So he sent me this text, and he said to me, Cara, he said, I know you teach about this stuff. He said, I know I should know better. He said, but I'm at the point where I'm going to have to take a job as a hospital orderly in my local town. He said, it's the only job I can find. He said, but I got to earn some money for my family. And he said, I know this work is important. You're going to tell me it's important. He said, but I used to be a theological lecturer. He said, I've written a book on theology, and now I have to stoop to being a hospital orderly. He said, give me some hope. So I wrote to him and I told him about the time when my daughter was 6 and she got leukemia. We ended up in hospital for quite a period of time. It took 2.5 years of treatment for her to get well again. And I told him that one of my daughter's favourite people in hospital was Joe. Joe was a hospital orderly. He used to have to push her to all sorts of different things, usually pretty painful procedures. But he always made it fun. He always had a joke. He snuck ice blocks into her. He always made her laugh. I can still remember his name, and that was over 20 years ago. So I told Alan, hospital orderly is a really significant job. It's a job where you can do good work for God. Well, I don't have time to tell you all the stories, but over the next few months, actually it started within 2 weeks, Alan started sending me stories of how God was using him in that workplace. He ended up deciding that he was having more gospel conversations as a hospital orderly than he'd ever had as a pastor. And all it was him being light and salt in that place, being a friendly face, and occasionally asking someone, did you want me to pray for you? Which as a hospital orderly probably could do in more ways than a nurse or a doctor could. And he ended up having these amazing experiences, including one woman who came to Christ just moments before she died from cancer. Incredible opportunities. He now often, when he goes around preaching, he often wears his hospital orderly clothes just to remind himself that there is no separation of work and worship. So I pray that Angela and Alan might inspire you to think about what you do, paid or unpaid, whether it's in the home, neighbourhood, community, in the workplace, whatever work you do, whatever you do with intent or purpose. How can you do that work with God, being on mission with God, where he wants you to be? Let me pray for you. Father God, I thank you for the opportunity that we've had to just see how you are at work in this world, how you are at work through our work, how you are at work through our work to the people we work with, through the work that we do. I pray, Lord, this morning that you might speak to each person here, give them a little glimpse. Maybe it's a look back at the work they did and seeing how it might have been part of your plan. Maybe it's a look forward from the work of schoolwork now to the future work that may be waiting. But for each person here, because we all do some sort of work, help us to have your imagination for our work. Help us to know how we might do it in a way that honours you, that serves others, that brings your light into what are sometimes very dark places. I pray, Lord, that you give us an insight on how we can work with you, how we can see you at work around us, how we can partner with you in that good work to the glory of God, to the praise of the name Jesus, and empowered by the Holy Spirit. Amen.